of uh, of uh, um, of outbreaks that go county by county along vectors where there is diminished vaccinations. That's telling us something. It's giving us data. We should respond to data. Get vaccinated if you can. If you can find your way to a hospital and get a shot, which I've had 3, not a big deal. Hasn't hurt, and it does suppress the most egregious symptoms of COVID. And it may save a life, and that life could be yours. It could be that of your family. So we are urging people to try and just consider that option and get vaccinated. It might protect America and allow us to get out of our homes and become more social again and allow the economy to thrive. Okay, let's get this show on the road. And please do contribute your questions as we move forward. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing how news organizations report on climate change facts, climate change fictions with special guest, Ben Strauss, CEO and Chief Scientist at Climate Central, the science news organization, and Meaghan Parker, Executive Director of the Society of Environmental Journalists. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show, and we'll announce results, and questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you both for joining us. It's really wonderful to have you. I'm so excited. I'm going to set you up. We're going to go over to you, Ben. 2021, wild ride for the climate, right? We were talking 3 to 5 years ago about eventually we would reach a tipping point. It's looking increasingly likely like we've actually reached some sort of a tipping point. And we've seen spikes in ocean temperatures. We've seen sea ice reductions. We've seen huge natural disasters in the United States, $420 billion plus weather disasters. We've seen tornadoes, fires, and so on and so forth. And we've seen an increase in news coverage. So let's talk about your organization, Climate Central, and how you're helping us to first understand what is going on and cope with it, because being informed means that we can do stuff, right? Individuals can do stuff, businesses can do stuff, governments can do stuff. Talk about how you report to equip me, my government, my business, right? My colleagues, my friends, my family, to navigate.
Thanks so much, Mark. First of all, for having me on, and for the time on this really important topic. And I think through the COVID crisis, right, we have this deepening appreciation of the importance of science for our lives, and also for the importance of effective science communication. And it's really, it can be quite challenging with climate as well as with COVID. The main thing we do at Climate Central is really to provide tools for climate communication in particular, but really tools that can be used by journalists and media organizations, but also by NGOs, businesses, and others that fundamentally help you to understand and communicate the local impacts of climate change and also local solutions at scale. So, that includes a program we have to support, say, local TV meteorologists to integrate climate into their broadcasts and social media through our Climate Matters program. It includes our real-time climate software package, which lets any subscriber get real-time alerts when weather and climate impacts in their location cross a certain threshold that, in our point of view, kind of presents an opportunity to talk about climate, tell a climate story, how climate is changing the impacts that we face. Connected to that, and quite important, and you referenced that, is our kind of growing work, and we have some research in the pipeline on this, to attribute the impacts we're experiencing and even the daily weather that we're experiencing to climate
So
change.
if I'm on the Outer Banks of Hatteras and I'm thinking about how do I protect from hurricanes, or if I'm in the Imperial Valley and I'm in California and I'm thinking about protecting the farmlands there from drought, or if I'm in Alaska and I'm thinking about the permafrost, or I'm in the Panhandle of Texas, where cattle feeding is a big industry, and water is always at a premium. You're going to be, regardless of whether I'm a meteorologist or if I'm a rancher, or if I'm just a citizen in an urban environment, you're trying to provide data. You're not actually trying to tilt my beliefs. You're trying to provide a basis upon which I can create my own beliefs. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. Right. Our goal is to convey, accurate and compelling climate information and make it ubiquitous. So we can tell you, was today's, we can quantify, put a number on how much has climate change likely affected your temperature today. With continuing research, maybe we can bring that to precip. But if you've just had a drought declaration or a crop failure, or you're in the middle of a health-threatening heat wave, right? We can say, well, how many days out of the trailing week or month or season have distinguishable climate fingerprints, right? That's the work we're putting in the pipeline right now. And how does this fit into the trend over the last 50 years, right? Is this becoming more common? Like, how unusual is today's weather or impact in the historic context? All of those are the kinds of things we try and deliver with that real local detail so that people can make better decisions on a local basis.
And Meaghan, how does this dovetail with your work and the Society of Environmental Journalists? I didn't even know years ago that there were environmental journalists until fairly recently, like the last 5 or 10 years, that it was actually a sub-discipline within the journalistic field. Talk a little bit about your work and also how the diversity of media now, with social media being a factor, various online and mobile interactions being a factor, the move increasingly from print to rich media, how does that affect the work of your folks?
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. And it's great to be here with you and with Ben today. The Society of Environmental Journalists was founded in 1990 to do exactly what you alluded to, is help, bring together environmental journalists to help each other out, to create a peer-to-peer support network to both provide the tools for reporting to each other, but also to support each other's and the growth of the beat as a career path, a sustainable career path, which certainly has been challenged, I'd say, in the last decade by, the larger changes in the media industry, including social media, to which you referred, but more importantly, to the whole changing business model of journalism. We have really strived to help continue our mission, which is to increase and improve environmental journalism throughout these ups and downs of the last 30 years, and particularly in the last 2, with COVID having a significant impact on journalists, both in terms of the demands of the beat, but also in terms of the economic impacts on their news outlets. So they're dealing with, everything from layoffs to being overworked to just burnout and trauma from covering, these twin existential threats that are facing us of COVID and climate change.
And journalism is also under attack. It used to be that you would measure a great journalist. There would be 2 measures. One is how true is what they were saying, how fact-based is what they were saying, how foundational was their research in terms of what they were conveying. And the second is, was it readable? Was it entertaining? Was it something that I could consume? Did they make it easy for me to understand? But now there's a third metric. Does that person agree with me? And if they don't, we're going to attack them. And if they do, we're going to support them. And regardless as to whether they're facts or not, and entertainment value seems to have basically overshadowed in certain respects, fact-based journalism. How has that affected your people, Meaghan? Because there is such a politicization of something that shouldn't be politicized, since we all experience the weather, and we all experience climate, and we all experience clean air or good drinking water, lead in the water, those kinds of issues. How does that affect your folks?
Well, we're not immune to these trends that have affected all journalists. I think, however, that environmental journalists and science journalists more broadly have been dealing with this issue for a lot longer than, say, some of the other beats, because the efforts to undermine scientific authority go back quite a long way. So one of SEJ's approaches to this is to ensure that all of our activities are designed by journalists for journalists. Journalists know what they need. They know what their fellow journalists need. It also helps us avoid accusations of undue influence by out advocates. We do work with all stakeholders and a very, very wide range of partners, but we have strict editorial independence guidelines that help insulate us, at least, from on a policy basis, from interference by these by funders and advocates and others, which of course are often the root of those kinds of attempts to undermine. In the bigger picture, one of the other ways that we see this trend happening is the attempt to suppress access to information, either through disinformation, actively targeting, bad information at people, or just the circulation of misinformation, as well as, good old government suppression of, or bureaucracy preventing access to important scientific information that the public has a right to know. So another big part of our work is advocating for access to scientific data and information. We have a very active Freedom of Information task force that works with a lot of different journalism groups to help and support reporters seeking to get that information about our air, about our water, about our food to the public that needs to know these things.
So we're just on the cusp of completing a poll in which we asked, daily news covers politics, business, crime, sports, education, and so on and so forth. How much headline coverage should there be on climate change? And nobody said, just none or sporadically. The greatest answer, and of course, is a select audience, that there should be at least a regular segment every day. It's just as important as anything else, right? If you're going to report on sports every day, report on climate and environmental issues every day. We also had a few people who said one regular segment each week or a segment every month. So everybody wants to know because it does affect everybody. But I have a question for you. In terms of how you are funded, how this reporting is funded, if you're talking about politics, political parties want to win, the political parties and the political interests will fund that. Business, right? Everybody wants to have attention paid to their company. Sports, it's an entertainment industry. There's somebody to fund that. There's no profit, is there? Where's your funding come from in climate environmental reporting? As a matter of fact, you had both alluded to the fact that there might be opposition to reporting on certain things. Ben, how do your folks get funded? How do your efforts get funded? Where are the interests that cause people to give of their treasure and their work life to this particular cause? What's happening here?
I think there's a couple of really important trends that are changing the news industry. I mean, traditionally, the news media industry was a profitable business.
Right.
It was a for-profit business that generated tons of cash, right? And
but
then
those eyes have all been appropriated by social media, right?
Yeah.
So
then
Facebook
that upheaval threw that whole business model into flux. And what we're seeing is the increase in new nonprofit business models supported by donations, whether from large foundations or from individual donors or from grassroots readers. There are a lot of these out there. Some have been highly successful, some less so. We haven't had a really good analysis of what works and what wasn't yet. I've been a strong advocate that somebody somewhere needs to sit down and say,
Yeah.
these business models, these nonprofit business models for journalism are working and these are not. We've tried a number of great things ourselves through our own fund for environmental journalism that supports beat reporter positions, staff positions at newspapers, as well as small story grants for journalists. But, I know Benjamin, also being nonprofit, has witnessed these trends as well and has different kinds of funding perspective.
Well, we're of course not a traditional media organization. We're not a newspaper magazine, and from the start we've been funded principally by foundations and individuals, a few government grants here and there, and now increasingly, although it's still a tiny fraction, generating some earned revenue streams through kind of research and data products. So
you're taking more of, are you taking more of an AP kind of model in which you are creating information and you have subscribers within this sector, and then you're also trying to create data products so that you have diversified revenue streams?
Yeah, it's a little closer to that. I mean, AP creates whole stories, and we really create story pieces and visuals and tools that others can incorporate.
Data visualization, for example.
Yeah. We're a visual species, right? We've got sea level maps and visuals. We've got TV-ready graphics and a whole range of topics from climate impacts to weather trends to renewable energy and its increase. But it's a challenging time in the media. I mean, even when we were getting started 14 years ago, right? Climate and environment are fairly technical topics inside journalism. It would be special to have a specialist at a smaller local or regional outlet. I mean, back in the day, even the large outlets weren't doing that well in terms of their staffing on climate. Now you see outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. The AP is standing up a climate unit. These kind of leading newsrooms are staffing up and have the resources, but now smaller news organizations and local ones, which are, by the way, the most trusted ones when you poll the public, right, they're struggling to hold on to a science specialist, let alone an environment or climate specialist. And so, we're hopeful that we can play a little bit of a role in providing support for those outlets to still tell climate stories, because we can provide scientific authority and confidence, right? What we give them is scientifically backed. Mainly, we provide tools. We also have a partnership journalism program where we essentially team up with a reporter or editor at a local outlet and co-byline a piece in which they do the local reporting in color, and we provide kind of the scientific backbone and context, or maybe provide some data from either our own analysis or analysis coming from the broader scientific community, as we've got an interesting hybrid with both practicing scientists and journalists on staff. But
one of the things that I find really interesting, Ben, is that as I travel around and I talk with people around the country, everybody's interested now. It used to be when I would go around and I would talk, I would get a lot of people who were saying, I'm not really too sure about this. People are being really alarmist. In the early days, the Inconvenient Truth days with Al Gore's slideshow and so on and so forth, there was huge skepticism. But I think everybody's just detected, whether it's hurricanes in Louisiana and flooding, or the fact that year after year after year we have droughts throughout the country. If you're a farmer, you care.
Yeah.
If you're living, in a heat wave urban center with few trees, you care. It doesn't matter.
This summer we had what's felt like a record season for extreme heat and other kind of weather climate impacts.
Fires in Colorado, my God,
in December, right? And actually, there was also a record jump in public opinion from the spring to the fall. So, I mean, this is a little bit our theory. Climate is originally a kind of devilishly hard topic to communicate around. But the more people see it in their neighborhood and in the present, right, the more urgent and tangible it becomes for them. And unfortunately, that's what's happening as people are experiencing the impacts. And importantly, as the media is increasingly slapping that climate change sticker and label on these events that we're experiencing. And that is a real shift. It was really different this summer than it would have been, say, 5 years ago. So I think the media is improving in that way. We're really seeing people understand it more. I think, the movie Don't Look Up is a great metaphor. At first, you just have these couple of scientists who can see the comet through their telescope, but no one can see it with their bare eyes on Earth, right? But then as time passes, like you can see it a little bit with your bare eyes and it gets bigger and bigger, right? And that's when people start to really wake up to it, unfortunately, too late.
What's really
in the
interesting
case of the movie.
We just finished another poll, Ben, and we asked what the primary source for information on climate change. It's all over the place, right? One person says broadcast national or broadcast news. Another says, major journals, local journals, webcasts, nonprofit media, and so on. It really is all over the place. It's very rare that we have such a dispersal of information, and that poses a challenge as well, because you can't just end up creating certain conduits for information. There's also a challenge in terms of us citizens, non-scientists, non-journalists, understanding the scientific method. How do you connect the dots between, and that was the whole thing with UP, they were talking science and people were talking instead communication strategies and branding and all these things that had nothing to do with facts. How do we educate, Meaghan, people, me, just a normal person who goes about work every day? How do we educate people to really understand a world that I'm not part of? I am not a scientist. I don't necessarily know the scientific method. How do we get there?
Well, I think from the journalist perspective, because this is a big problem, right? We have people who have if you look at what's happening with COVID, you have people who have something that's touching them right in front of them, and yet they still are not concerned or
and branding and messaging are not facts, right?
In it the right way. So it's clear that while journalism is a methodology based on facts and observation, and the concept that if you present information to people, they will absorb it and make the right decisions, it's clear that we need to kind of step back and think about what other factors are impeding that theory of change from reaching certain segments. I would say that overall, we see, as the polling numbers that Ben mentioned, and we see this in both climate change and COVID, that yes, people are absorbing more information and they are seeing what's happening and they are realizing what's happening. But that is not necessarily sufficient to lead to political change. As we've seen, there are other forces at work, obviously, out there that can counteract this absorption of information leading to action. In terms of, and partly what they exploit is exactly what you're saying, the people's lack of fundamental shared understanding of complex scientific topics. And I think it's rooted both in sort of how we understand risk. And it's not just the scientific method, it's also about risk, right? So part of it is just how science is produced, but also part of it is in large part what we understand is a reasonable risk or an unreasonable risk. I think that's a missing element of education in our society that really affects this.
I'm sorry for speaking over you, but you just incited this thought. Do you all need, as journalists and as fact-based individuals, do you all need to become better at the edutainment piece that is driving social media today, of making it more fun, more interesting, more digestible to absorb your information. Because it seems to me that part of the genius of the successful disinformation and purveyors of non-fact, emotionally based media is its entertainment value. It's just fun.
Well,
People
I'm
get
not sure.
relieved.
I'm not sure if fun is the word. I think they're tapping into some deeper emotions of anger and exclusion that people respond to. Those are very powerful, but it is emotional. I'll agree with that. And I think that there is, journalism has long been about the people story, right? There's a common question: who are the people? Where are the people? I remember one journalist, a very highly successful series, he said when he first pitched it to his editor, and it was about fishing, editor said, I don't want to do stories about fish. Don't tell me about fish. And he said, no, it's about the people who do the fishing. And then she was like, okay. And this went on to win, multiple awards and change the world and everything.
Yeah, I think broadly, right? We're talking, oh, sorry. Just, it's a question of making the content interesting and compelling, right? Edutainment is one flavor of that, but there are a lot of strategies. It is challenging, though. We are not wired to have the same level of interest in, long-term shifts in the weather that we are around, well, what's my neighbor doing? What's this tribe doing? Right? So that is, again, kind of grounding it in people. The more we can ground it in people and or local contexts, what matters to me, I think, the more we can make it visual, because we're a very visual species. 30% of the brain is for vision, 10% is for, language and logic, roughly speaking, by volume. So there are a lot of strategies to employ, but it's a hard problem at the same time.
I'm going to respectfully assert that we all have an issue here. I believe that it's not the negative side. I think it's the actual fun and release side. I think even getting angry can be fun, right? You can finally get angry. You don't have to have all these social strictures of being polite, right? You can just let it all go. And I just feel that journalism, conventional journalism, fact-based journalism is provided too often in a boring way. And I think that there is a whole group of people who use communication in a way that is far more creative, and they're being successful. And we end up with this tilting of American civil society, which is quite damaging. I think we've got to get off of our high horse. I'm trying to do it here. I'm trying to create short, fact-based discussions of really important issues. And we think about this every day. How do we keep it exciting? How do we engage people? And I think that we've just got to do a way better job. I think it's on us, because if we're not making it exciting, then people are going to go to wherever the exciting stuff is. And if it's disinformation, they'll go there. How do we change?
Everybody has something to contribute to this, right? And I think that, if you look at the well-resourced publications, they are trying a number of different ways, right? You look at, the New York Times, right? They've got videos, they've got polls, they've got text-based, interactions. You can shine
Moving
up.
pictures, right?
But
Yeah,
yes, I'll also say that, right?
But,
don't look up. It's the first half-good climate movie we've had, period, right? For the topic, frankly, that in the history books that are written 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, the only thing that the future will care about is what we did on climate. They will not give a damn about anything else. And for a topic of that magnitude in the sweep of human history, right? There's one half-good movie, and we're struggling. We're struggling in the journalism and communication field. Absolutely. It's an area that needs a lot more investment, because we're not there. We're not there at the level of communication that you need for a topic that is really going to be the defining topic of the next thousands of years, what we do.
if you take it down to the local paper level, right? You've got local papers that are operating on staffs of like 2 or 3 people. Those people are not going to be making fun videos. You know, they're trying to cover schools, COVID, crime, politics, corruption, and maybe climate change if they're lucky, right? Like on their lunch break. So, you know, there is a real challenge here in the funding and the resources to do what you're talking about. And the disinformation, misinformation side, where they're getting their money, clearly they don't care, you know, how much it costs, you know, if it meets their political aims, right? So there has to be a lot more investment at a biggest scale possible if that is the answer, right? Because those things are expensive.
And it's up to us because our lives depend on it. Ben Strauss, CEO and Chief Scientist at Climate Central, and Meaghan Parker, Executive Director, Society of Environmental Journalists. This has been a great discussion, really fascinating. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you for the work of your folks who are fighting the good fight. And thank you for sharing some of the actions that we can all take to make facts more interesting, more visualized, as you are doing, Ben, and engaging more people as you are doing, Meaghan. Thanks so much. Stay safe. And that's the Nonprofit Report. Attendees, thank you so much for your questions, which we found very useful. And we'll see you on Thursday.